of Judah. And they took 200,000 women in captivity. And I'll get to that next time. God told him that wasn't, I'm as mad at Jews as anything. So I'm looking at this and I'm saying to myself, does this, and also 2 Kings chapter 16 as well, the first 20 verses. Okay. And so I'm looking at this, and in 1 Corinthians it says the Old Testament was written for our example. In other words, what I try to do is when I'm preaching out of the New Testament, I use Old Testament illustrations to illustrate a principle in the New Testament. And so as I'm looking at this, I ask myself in verse 4, take heed and be quiet, fear not, neither be faint-hearted. And then in verse 9 it says, if you will not believe, surely you shall be established. So my question is, can I lift that up out of the page? Can I lift this up out of the text and say to us tonight, that is also true for us today? So I'm saying is, what God said to Isaiah to say to the king, I can say that to you tonight. Take heed and be quiet, fear not, neither be faint-hearted. And then in verse 9 it says, if you will not believe, surely ye shall not be established. So, I was looking at this. A Christian should never fall apart. A believer, it should not ever be diagnosed that they are falling apart. And it does seem like so many, quote, Christians can be, quote, diagnosed as falling apart. And my question is, how does that happen? Well, then my thought process turned to mental illness. And I said, can I stretch the text to make it talk about mental illness because of the place that's taking place this week? What took place last Friday? What was the name of that? What was the name of the elementary school? Sandy Hook. Sandy Hook Elementary School. In where? Newtown, Connecticut. And the young man that committed the crime, that's all we've heard the last couple of weeks, the last couple of days, is his mental condition. And now they're trying to figure out how can we keep that happening. And my comment is, how could we have kept that happening? And my comment is, what? Keep it from happening, which is you can't to some degree. At some point, at some time, it's going to happen. Maybe not in that severe. So my question comes back is, so in the process, I'm saying to myself, how can people be diagnosed as mental ill? And they're confused. So I kept looking all that stuff up, and I started to bring 2 or 3 people up here. And I was going to ask you to give a diagnosis of how do you view those people? And I wonder how you sometimes diagnose me. Don't, please
You
don't.
don't want to know.
I don't know. All of us subjectively diagnose everybody we know.
No.
Subjectively. In other words, when I went to the doctor today, I walked into the office, and the first thing she wanted me to do is to give a urine exam. I said, I'm not here for that. She said, get used to it. Every time you come, you're going to have to do this. We're not going to give you a diagnosis until we know scientifically, objectively, what your problem is. When we diagnose people subjectively, we're looking at them from our perspective and from our culture, and we're diagnosing them as being some kind of problem. We look at their behavior, and so we kind of diagnose them not based on any objective thinking, but subjectively, and therefore we have a diagnosis for everything that is under the sun. Now, when I came in this morning and tonight, and I saw my good friend Carlos, and he was crawling underneath the chairs. It certainly reminded me of me when I was his age and my brother was right behind me chasing me. That took place until 2 or 3 deacons got hold of me, and that was the end of that. I hated that. That's why it was so much fun. My dad said, I'm preaching, I can't do this, so if you see my sons do anything they shouldn't be doing, it's your responsibility to correct them. I hated that, because everybody in the church wanted to correct us. They just took it upon themselves to correct God all night every single Sunday. And it was getting to be boring after a while. So I came back and then I said, so then how can I diagnose Carlos? He has got some kind of disorder. His behavior is not the ordinary. So we diagnose him like that with some kind of psychological whatever.
He's 3 years old.
He has a particular personality disorder diagnosis. And whatever it is, a clinical substance. So anyway, and I'm looking at that, is that we have to diagnose him when in fact he's normal.
Yep.
He's absolutely normal. There's absolutely nothing wrong with the young boy. Nothing. Every single boy that's a boy has that problem. It's not a problem, it's what he likes doing. And so what they're doing now is they're going to take him to some psychologist, and psychologist, he's got a disorder, and we're trying to stop it from him crawling underneath the seat. And they have come up clinically 52 clinical testings for little kids crawling underneath seats at church. And we can put him in this program that we can give him, and we'll give him a certain amount of pills to see if it'll alleviate what is wrong with him. And so maybe he comes to church next Sunday and he's only doing it under one chair, and he says, can't do that anymore, and so forth. That's what happens a lot of times, is that normal behavior becomes a subjective thinking, and we diagnose it as something wrong, and therefore he has to see some kind of clinical psychologist who's going to say to him, there's something mentally wrong with him, therefore we got to use some medication to get him off of it, when in fact he's perfectly normal. I mean, he may have a he has a disruptive mood. How many of you know someone near you that has moods that is disruptive? Hello? And all of a sudden we want to diagnose that person as schizophrenia. So what we have to do is, there is a clinical test. There are 32 clinical tests that involves helping people who have disruptive moods, dysregulation disorder. And it leads to taking drugs to see if we can correct something that's normal. And in the case of recent events, when we experience grief over the death of loved ones, there is a natural despondence on our part. When my dad died and I was 16 years old, I was despondent for at least 6 months. It's a natural response when you lose somebody that you're going to look different to somebody else. What is wrong with him? My girlfriend at the time says, Charles, what is wrong with you? You can't you can't teach anymore. You don't talk very well. You can't find the page number in the song book. What is your problem? Do you need to see a psychologist or a counselor? And I was acting normal. I was responding normal. I didn't have a disorder. I didn't have a mental illness. I was acting normal. What happens is that we misdiagnose the symptom, and we think there's something mentally wrong with a person when in fact it is perfectly normal. So a person has anxiety disorder. Who doesn't? There are 26 clinics going on that you can enroll yourself in if you have anxiety disorders. And they're going to give you some medication to help your mind not become disordered. When in fact, anxiety in certain issues are going to happen. My anxiety happens when I see a dog. And my anxiety level raises up pretty high. Unfortunately, I'm sorry that happens. So what I'm saying is, what is the cure for all of this? Is there a biblical cure for all this? And I'm looking at all this. Do we need, and then someone said, well, it's genetic. Someone says it's biological. Some say it's psychological. Some say it is environmental factors. And so we are trying to find some subjective reason why we act like we act. And of course they say we may never know why this young man did what he did. And we are trying to subjectively, we will never know. We didn't take a blood test. We didn't look to find out what's taken on. So the question is, there are how many people did we learn in America that can be diagnosed as having some form of behavior problems in America? One out of every 10 children has some form of disorder. And so I'm saying to myself, does the Bible address it? Does the Bible address how Christians are to respond to people who we observe that may not have the behavior that we think is culture correct? And we have subjectively said to them something must be wrong with them, when in fact they may be normal. And so I've had this conversation with myself a long time. I do not believe that the Bible teaches that a believer should ever have anxiety to a point of becoming psychotic, whatever all that means. I'm using scientific terms, but they're not biblical terms. If I diagnose you, you say, Charles, what do you think my problem is? I'm not going to diagnose you clinically, I'm not going to, what do you think my problem is with my children, with my kids?